Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from here in the podcasting studios at the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. You're going to meet another one in a couple of minutes. I would like to acknowledge, first of all, that I live and work in the traditional land of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt. And all of this is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, who are changing what banking can do for people, for community, and for the planet. Okay, I'm going to take you back 100 years. It's 1925. The winter of 1925, Victoria had a frost-free winter. It was a warm winter back then. We were living in what was called the Jazz Age. 1925 was when The Great Gatsby was published. The President of the United States was Calvin Coolidge. The Premier of BC was a guy named John Oliver, and the Prime Minister of Canada was William Lyon Mackenzie King. And also in 1925, the Stanley Cup was won by the Victoria Cougars. We're going to have a chat about that today. We're going to have a big party coming up as well later on this month, which we'll talk about. One of the people involved in that is my good friend John Wilson, who is the president and CEO of the Wilsons Group. He is a chamber governor, past board chair. John, how are you?
I'm doing well, Bruce. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. So this whole thing that's happening at the end of the month is being done by the Victoria Hockey Legacy Society, which you are the head of. So how do you explain the Hockey Legacy Society to somebody who's never heard of it?
Well, we're a group that was hastily put together back in 23 to bid on and put on the Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada event that we hosted here in Victoria in January of 2024. Originally, the society was put together just for that event, but we had such a great time doing it. We had so many volunteers, and the team and the event itself was so successful that the team said, hey, if there's ever a team of volunteers in the committee, if there's ever another event that we can do, let's look at it. So my good friend Helen Edwards, who you're going to be talking to here shortly, has been passionate from day one about the 100-year anniversary of the Victoria Cougars winning the Stanley Cup. And a group in Oak Bay had started discussions around the century celebration idea, and they reached out to us and talked to our committee, and here we are today.
It's kind of an obvious question, but why is it important to do this, to recognize the 100th anniversary of winning the Cup?
Well, I think it's an education piece first and foremost. You won't believe how many people that I've talked to that didn't have any idea that this happened. So it's a great legacy piece and celebration, if you will, for our community. Which I don't think we do enough of, to be quite honest with you. We're a pretty humble community, and I think we should take pride in where we live and what we can pull off here. We've put on some big events here, including the Commonwealth Games, World Juniors, and alike, and including Hockey Day in Canada. And so we need to be proud of our heritage, of our city, and celebrate something that obviously was only ever done once here in Victoria, and most likely will never be done again unless our city becomes quite larger than it is today, and I don't think anybody wants that. So it's very nice to look back at a simpler time and a celebration of some young men who won the championship of hockey in Canada.
Yeah, so the Stanley Cup weekend, when the Cup was here for Hockey Day in Canada, that was a remarkable weekend. That was a week-long full of events. But the thing of it is that all of Canada got to watch what we do here in Victoria. That was the week it snowed. Like, what? Yeah. Who called for that? How did that happen?
Well, it certainly wasn't me, Bruce, because as I've mentioned to you before, I talked to many people from Sportsnet and Scotiabank and lots of people from back east in the year lead up to this event and telling them, don't worry, it never snows here in Victoria. And sure enough, our golf event got snowed out that week. It was quite a stressful time. But just like we do in Victoria, we rolled with the punches and put on a hot stove at Victoria Golf Course that was phenomenal, and had people as they left say that this was way better than any golf could ever be. So it was kind of neat. It was to have the synthetic ice surface, which was the brainchild of you, Bruce, when we were talking about putting this on. As you can imagine, Victoria being one, if not the only place in Canada at the time that couldn't have an outdoor rink or would have to have artificial outdoor rink. And it was your idea around the synthetic ice rink, which we were able to purchase, and it's become a legacy piece, and that'll be out again at Century Celebration. So it was, it all just clicked. It was an amazing event last January.
The thing I was really looking forward to the most, in addition to having my Detroit Red Wings jersey on and my picture taken with the Stanley Cup, was sending pictures back to Ontario when we were golfing in January, but we didn't get a chance to do that. But the legacy of that lives on. So the last weekend of this month is when the events are happening, John, all over Oak Bay. And there's a reason for it being in Oak Bay, because that's where the Victoria Cougars won the Cup.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where the monument is, right near Oak Bay High School. And we've spent some money and done up that monument. We're getting some nice blue and yellow flowers from Bouchard Gardens to put around it. And we've got 2 Stanley Cup banners made. One will hang proudly at the Oak Bay Rec Center. The other one will hang proudly at Save on Foods Memorial Center. And we have a big music night on Thursday night, March 27th at the Barton Banker, which will be really exciting, a song contest with the winner getting $5,000. And then skip to Saturday, and that's where all the community programming and all the fun happens, right at the on Oak Bay Rec Center's site, with our synthetic ice service, our stage, live music, and lots of NHL alumni around. And Saturday night, of course, is the gala, sold out gala at Oak Bay Beach Hotel. And then Sunday, some more community stuff at the on site at Oak Bay Rec Center. And along the way, on Saturday, we'll be doing a unveiling of the Stanley Cup as well. The Stanley Cup arrives late here Saturday night, and on Sunday, it will be here in person on Sunday on site in the community gathering at Oak Bay High School Rec Center.
Well, John, thank you for your leadership as always. You've been a community leader for a long time. Thanks for heading up this team and allowing people like me to be a part of it, because it's tons of fun. And we will see you the last weekend of March, if not before. John, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Victoria's most fascinating person is going to join us next. She is the person who put this book together and is the driving force behind the Century Celebration. Helen Edwards is next. Helen Edwards with us today on Chamber Chats. This book right here is one that Helen has written. It's available all over the place, and the proceeds go to Canuck Place. Helen, you fascinate me. You fascinate a lot of people because, first of all, you show your colors very proudly all the time. Tell us what you're wearing.
I am wearing a reproduction jersey from the 1925 Cougars and hats. And both these will be available during the celebration. And the proceeds will go to the Courtnall Family Society for Mental Health.
Yeah. This book you've written is called The History of Professional Ice Hockey in Victoria, 1911 to 2011. But it's 1925. We're focusing on the Century Celebration. So who are these guys? Who were the Victoria Cougars?
It's sort of a amalgam of everything you ever wanted in hockey. And man, when they started off, they weren't very good. And then, of course, the war came, so there was no club then. And circumstances just led to, okay, some guys came back. They landed some of the best players ever after the war. Then a franchise folded in Seattle, and Lester Patrick, the hockey genius, grabbed 3 of those guys, added them to the Cougars, and guess what happened? The next year they won the Cup. So
how about that? So this is the only British Columbia team, Canucks fans, pay attention, the only British Columbia team that's ever won the Stanley Cup.
No, Vancouver did it.
Oh, Vancouver, when did they win?
Vancouver Millionaires, good question.
Is it after these guys or before?
No, before. I think it was 1915 with Cyclone Taylor.
Oh, okay, right. But anyway, this is something that, for Victoria, this is amazing. So why is it important to you for us to recognize this occasion, this Century Celebration?
Well, I think because I know not everybody is into sports as I am, but this was a momentous day for Victoria. Little old Victoria, way out in the West Coast with a tiny little budget, beat the Montreal Canadiens with a huge budget in the East. that was unheard of. They thought they were going to take the series in 3 straight. And the press said that too. It was all over the place. Oh, nobody can beat Montreal, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what?
We did.
Victoria Cougars did.
And this was the Habs. The Howie Morenz was on that team, was
Yes,
he not?
and Ariel Joliette.
Yeah.
Yes.
And their Georges Vezina had been the goalie, but he didn't play in this series,
Yeah.
right?
No, he was not.
Yeah, because he got tuberculosis or something. Is that what
Something.
happened? Happy. But this is the kind of heritage we're talking about. This is the Montreal Canadiens, the dynasty of the NHL, and the Victoria Cougars beat them. In fact, the Cougars were not a professional team, were they?
They were paid.
Okay.
They belonged they didn't belong, obviously, to the forerunner to the NHL,
Right.
which was the NHA. They were professionals, but they didn't get paid the same amount of money. And hear what a contract was? It was a telegram. I accept.
Really?
That's how they approved it. And the original thing was maybe 3 sentences. I'll play for this amount of money, blah, blah, and not like pages and pages and pages and bonuses and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It was very, very simple. They played, one man said he would play here because I started with you guys and that's where I'm going to finish.
Yeah.
And finish he did with a Stanley Cup. So,
We talk about the name like Howie Morenz and Ariel Joliette that played for Montreal. A guy named Frank Foyston was the team captain here. Tell me about him.
No, he came from Seattle, but he was
Yeah.
not the captain. Clem Laughlin was the
Clem
captain.
Laughlin was the captain. Okay.
Yes, Clem Laughlin, who most people in Canada will not know, was the inspiration for all the Sutters because he was from Viking, Alberta.
Oh.
And so if Clem and his brother had not played hockey, it's doubtful if the Sutters and their great legacy would have ever started. So.
Yeah. What was Victoria like in 1925, do you think? Like, what kind of a place was it back then?
It was sure a lot different from what it is now.
Neither of us were there, by the way.
No, I went. No, contrary to popular belief, no, I was not there. It was very small. It was in Vancouver's shadow.
Yeah.
It hadn't been before, but eventually, when the railway came, everything went to Vancouver pretty well. It was a nice place to live.
Still is.
Yeah, people had a lot of civic pride, and that included their hockey
I was
too.
going to say, because they must have been, this wasn't a bandwagon thing. They'd been fans for the Cougars for a long time.
Well, they'd been fans. I mean, they were packing the arena from the first game in 1912, and there was the break for the war, but they came, and as a matter of fact, they had to broadcast some of the games because they couldn't get everybody into the arena. And what they did, obviously they didn't have all this fancy equipment we have now. Somebody sent it on a wire to, with a telegraph.
Yeah.
We're talking ancient technology here. Sent it to Archie Wills, who was with the time, I believe it was the Times then, as a reporter, and he would broadcast it.
Yeah.
And it was sponsored by Fletcher Music. And so people were able to hear the games, and this was radical.
Yeah.
Now we can watch hockey, we can stream it, we can do anything. But this was a big deal because they just couldn't get everybody in.
Yeah, and as we said with John earlier, this wasn't in Victoria either. This was in Oak Bay.
It was in Oak Bay, yes.
So why was that?
Because that's where they built the arena.
Really? The Patricks built that, right?
The Patricks built the arena, yeah. And virtually across from where Oak Bay High School is now, because there's a plaque there, monument, I guess you'd call it.
I think they call it a cairn or something.
A cairn. Oh, no, we can't call it a cairn because that has a specific meaning.
Oh, okay.
We must call it a monument because we must be technically correct in our language.
Yes, mustn't we? We must be correct.
Yes, we have all the English people on our head or something, of which I sometimes am one. But all the names of the players are on there, and it has just been refurbished, as John said. and we will be holding a rededication ceremony during the weekend.
Yeah. That's all that stuff that's happening the last weekend
Yeah.
of May, or March rather, is when it's all happening.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about this in just a second as we hear more stories about the century celebration from the Victoria Cougars winning the Stanley Cup. Helen Edwards is our guest today on Chamber Chats. There was some really interesting characters. You and I have talked about this before. The guy that was the goalie for the Victoria Cougars is from my hometown in Ontario.
Yeah, I
And
know.
he's a guy that Hap Holmes, and he moved around in the league a lot, didn't he?
Well, a lot of them did.
Yeah.
But that's what I say. It just sort of happened that everybody sort of coalesced in Victoria at the right time.
Yeah.
And he was fabulous. And he, as you know, he wore a hat.
Yeah, he did. I think he wore a hat at one point because he had a bald head.
Yeah.
And people used to throw things at him all
Well,
the time.
yeah, because people were not very nice and they threw things a lot. And another thing to remember, I mean, I realized he was a goalie, so he would have played the whole game. Most of the others played almost the whole game too, because it was they didn't change lines every 45 seconds like they do now.
Yeah, they were just out there giving her all the way through,
Yeah,
right?
and it was the Patricks actually that brought in changing on the fly, and experts have said that's why they beat Montreal.
Oh, okay. Because he brought in a bunch of stuff, right? Lester Patrick brought in a huge amount.
Well, it was actually his brother Frank
Okay.
who had the brains for the rules, to give him credit. But all sorts of different rules. The penalty shot. First penalty shot was taken by a Cougar.
Really?
Of course it was, yes.
No kidding.
Tommy Dunderdale, who was from Winnipeg, born in Australia, and is in the Hall of Fame. The number of people who played in that Stanley Cup who are now in the Hall of Fame is pretty amazing.
Yeah, this whole story is amazing. I mean, it's partly told in this book, as we mentioned before. Where can we get one of these?
You can get it at any bookstore in Victoria, and for the next couple of weeks, they will be also available at the Bank of Nova Scotia in Oak Bay.
And, of course, the proceeds from the book sale go to
Canuck Place
Yeah.
Children's Hospice.
This is not the only book you've written. You've got I keep saying you're this fascinating person, but oh my gosh, you've written so many books about you're the architecture. Is it the
Heritage Detective.
Heritage Detective. So you write
That's-
about books about houses around here.
Yeah, that's about people. Two different volumes about different houses in Victoria and the people who lived and worked in them. And I deliberately did not pick mansions because I'm far more interested in the little houses where ordinary people lived, and some of their stories are extraordinary. And some of them still survive, from 1893. That's pretty rare in Victoria. And so did that. I also wrote, too, about my father-in-law, who was in the Canadian Navy for 38 years. And the latest book I wrote was on the Victoria Harbour Cats, of which John Wilson and I are part owners.
Yeah, and we're going to do another chamber chat about that when we get closer to baseball season, too. So when these guys, so the Cougars and these other two, how many games would they play in a year, in a season?
I think they finally it was 28.
And compared to today?
Oh, yeah, but shoot, they were playing maybe 40 minutes a game out of
Yeah.
60. There is one funny story I have to tell you. They had Moose Johnson was a fabulous defenseman for the Cougars.
Great name.
And they had Moose Johnson night in Victoria, and they invited 500 kids to come because the paper boys just loved him. So they played and they played and they played, and it was tied after regulation time. They played 2 overtime periods, and finally they said, "We got to call it. Everybody's exhausted," because they'd played virtually 5 periods of hockey.
Yeah.
And the Cougars actually played 4 of the longest games in league history, and they won most of them. But that one went into the books as a tie.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they were exhausted.
Oh, they're not wearing a lot of gear back then either, right?
Well, no, and they had very little protection either. So if you got injured, you felt it.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet. So as this team evolved, they won the Stanley Cup. Then they left town.
Well, they had another year.
Yeah.
They played the next season. They won again, and they played for the Stanley Cup, but they didn't win.
The evolution of the team, they eventually ended up in, and I referenced this when we were talking to John Wilson, they ended up in Detroit,
They did.
and the Patricks went to New York.
Well, Lester did.
Yeah. So what did he do in New York?
He was the general manager of the team, And for one game, he even was the goalie because they didn't. Somebody got injured, so Lester went in his 40s and put on the pads and played goal.
That was for the Rangers.
Yeah, for the Rangers.
And eventually the Cougars would eventually become the Detroit Red Wings,
Yeah.
which is my favorite hockey team. There are a couple of names before that, though, right? The
Yeah,
Falcons.
they started out as the Cougars.
Yeah.
And then because they went through different ownership changes. Then they became the Falcons, and then they became the Red Wings, and that's the name they have today. And the Red Wings will be celebrating their centennial next year, and I will be there as a guest of the owners.
Of the Red Wings. Is that still Mike Ilitch that owns the Red
Yeah,
Wings?
it's
Little Caesars Pizza guy.
yeah.
Because at one time the Detroit Tigers were owned by the guy that owned Domino's Pizza, and the Red Wings were owned by the guy that started Little Caesars Pizza. Because I'm a Detroit Tigers fan, too,
Right,
so that's
okay.
how I know these things. Helen, the book you wrote here and all the ones you've written are just fascinating. This is a borderline dumb question. What motivates you to write all these great books? Why do you do this?
Because I feel I was put on this earth to write and tell people. Because I think people should know about their history. I think it's really important. Because I can tell you, when I was doing the books about my father-in-law, he was talking about the flu epidemic because they're journals from when he was in the Navy. He's talking about the flu epidemic. Well, you know something? A century later, we had another one. We had a COVID epidemic. And maybe we should have learned from what had happened before, but we didn't. And just another interesting coincidence. My father-in-law was out in Victoria in the 20s with the Naval College when it moved out here. And he went to Cougars games and he wrote about Fredrickson being a great player. So, you know, my lives cross every so often. And I just thought, I didn't know this. You know, I didn't know about his journals when the man was alive. Yeah. I wish I had, because I would have asked him a million questions. But as so often happens, we don't know what we've got until it's gone. And so, yeah, I just feel very strongly about history. It was instilled in me by my father that we should know where we came from. So, yeah, that's what I've been doing.
And you do it well. Edwards Heritage Consulting actually is the operation that Helen does with this book and so many others. Please look them up. Helen, thank you for the support that you brought for Hockey Day in Canada and for the century celebration. Thank you for being a chamber champion as well, which you are. And for all of these fascinating stories, we could go on, but we're going to do this again and we'll talk about the baseball book about the Harbor Cats.
Okay.
We'll do that. Helen Edwards, our guest today on Chamber Chats. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again.